I hadn't touched a woman in 10 years until a beautiful girl came with an unexpected request. Daniel had not touched a woman in 10 years. It was not that he hated people or avoided social gatherings entirely. He went out sometimes, smiled when necessary, and even talked to his colleagues. But when it came to intimacy, to connection, to closeness, he had shut that part of his life off a long time ago. He had built a quiet fortress around his heart, made of years of disappointment, heartbreak, and the steady passage of lonely nights. He lived in a small apartment in the city. It was tidy, organized, and calm, but it lacked warmth. There were no pictures on the walls, no reminders of laughter or love. Each piece of furniture was placed just so, each item in its place. It was comfortable, yes, but it was also lonely. Daniel liked order. Chaos made him nervous, but he had traded the excitement of life for the safety of routine. Every morning, he woke up at 6. The sunlight came through the small window of his bedroom, brushing against the plain walls. He made himself tea, toasted some bread, and read the news on his laptop. Then he went for a walk. His walks were long and solitary. He knew almost every street in his neighborhood, every little shop, and every tree-lined path. The world moved around him, people came and went, but he was always on the sidelines, observing, watching, but never joining. Daniel remembered a time when he had not been so alone. 10 years ago, he had loved fiercely. He had trusted someone with his heart completely. And when it ended, suddenly, painfully, he had felt as if the world itself had betrayed him. That heartbreak had been a storm that tore through his life, leaving him battered and cautious. From that moment on, he had promised himself that he would not let anyone in again. Love, he decided, was too painful, too uncertain. He would protect himself by keeping a distance, by not touching, not caring too much, not hoping. His friends tried. Some called, some visited. At first, he went along with it, but eventually the invitations stopped coming. People moved on, married, traveled, fell in love, or found new friends. Daniel stayed in the same rhythm, day after day, year after year. It became comfortable in a strange way, this isolation. He knew exactly what to expect, and that predictability gave him a sense of control he could not find anywhere else. But even control has its limits. There were nights when Daniel felt the weight of loneliness pressing down on him. He would sit by his window, staring at the city lights, wondering what life felt like when shared with someone who cared. He remembered laughing with someone who understood his thoughts without words, holding hands while walking under the stars, feeling safe and wanted. These memories were bittersweet. They made him ache, yet they reminded him that life had once been vibrant and alive. Daniel's life was quiet but not without moments of small joy. He loved reading books, especially novels that transported him to another world. He enjoyed cooking, experimenting with flavors and recipes, even though there was no one to share the meals with. Sometimes he volunteered at the local library or helped out in community events. These interactions were brief, polite, and safe. They allowed him to feel human without risking his heart. One particular morning, Daniel followed his usual routine. He woke up, made his tea, and glanced out the window. The sun was rising, casting golden light over the streets below. People were walking to work, children were on their way to school, and the city was alive with noise and movement. He watched it all quietly, feeling detached yet strangely comforted by the normal rhythm of life. He dressed neatly, put on his shoes, and stepped out for his morning walk. The streets smelled fresh after last night's rain. Puddles reflected the sky, and the air carried the faint scent of wet asphalt and flowers from nearby gardens. Daniel walked slowly, noticing the details he had learned to observe over the years. The way a shopkeeper arranged fruits in the window, the angle of the morning sunlight on a building, the chatter of people waiting at the bus stop. To an outsider, it might have seemed dull, but to Daniel, it was a small kind of beauty. He passed by a cafe he frequented sometimes. It was quiet in the morning, with just a few early risers sipping their coffee. He knew the owner by name, Mr. Rao, a cheerful man who always had a joke ready. Daniel nodded politely as he passed, but he didn't stop. His walks were meant for thinking, not for chatting. He liked the solitude, the chance to process his thoughts before the world fully woke up. As he walked further, he felt the familiar sense of calm that came with knowing the route, the rhythm of his steps matching the quiet hum of the city. But today, something felt different. He didn't know what it was yet. Maybe it was the sunlight shining a little brighter, or the air feeling unusually fresh. Maybe it was just his mind playing tricks. He shrugged and continued walking, unaware that life was about to nudge him in an unexpected direction. Daniel's thoughts wandered to the past. He thought about the mistakes he had made, the opportunities he had missed, and the people he had hurt, sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. He wondered if he had been too cautious, too afraid of vulnerability. He remembered moments when he had almost reached out to someone, almost allowed himself to be close, but had pulled back at the last moment. He had spent so long hiding that even he sometimes forgot how to open up. Despite his careful life, Daniel felt a tiny spark of curiosity. What would it feel like to trust again, to laugh freely with someone, to share a meal, a conversation, a quiet evening at home? These thoughts were dangerous, he knew. They could lead to disappointment. And yet they were there, whispering in the corners of his mind, hinting at a world he had abandoned. As he neared the park, Daniel noticed children playing, couples walking hand in hand, and an old man feeding pigeons. The laughter of children reminded him of something he had forgotten, the simple joy of connection. He smiled faintly, a rare gesture these days, feeling a warmth that had been missing for too long. He realized that even in his isolation, he still longed for companionship, even if he was afraid to admit it. Daniel's walk continued, longer than usual, as if he were searching for something without knowing what it was. He passed streets he had never explored, discovering small cafes, bookstores, and quiet benches where the morning sun spilled through the trees. He felt a strange mixture of fear and excitement. Maybe he was ready for something new, something that could change his life. By the time he returned to his apartment, the day was in full swing. The city buzzed with energy, but Daniel felt a quiet shift inside him. He was still the same man who had avoided intimacy for 10 years, still cautious, still hesitant. But something had stirred, a small seed of possibility, fragile and uncertain, yet alive. And Daniel did not know it yet, but his life was about to change. A chance encounter, a bold and unexpected request, would soon break the long spell of solitude he had cast over himself. The walls he had built around his heart were about to be tested, and the journey back to connection, trust, and intimacy would begin. For the first time in a decade, Daniel wondered if he could allow someone into his life, not just physically, but emotionally, completely, and without fear. It was a terrifying thought, but also an exhilarating one. He didn't know what would happen next, but he felt a spark of hope he hadn't felt in years. And that spark was enough to make him step forward, even if cautiously, into the unknown. Daniel's life, though steady and predictable, was about to take a turn he never expected. It started on one of his usual morning walks, the city still waking up around him. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of flowers and fresh bread from nearby bakeries. He had just passed the familiar little cafe he sometimes visited, and was considering turning back home when he noticed someone standing awkwardly near a bench. She was young, maybe in her mid-20s, with long hair that caught the sunlight and eyes that seemed to notice everything. Daniel usually didn't pay much attention to strangers. People came and went every day, and most were just part of the city's constant movement. But there was something different about this woman. She didn't look like she belonged in a rush. Instead, she seemed to pause, carefully observing her surroundings as if she were waiting for someone. Daniel slowed his steps, feeling an unusual curiosity. He kept walking but couldn't help glancing at her. Her expression was soft but serious, and there was a quiet confidence in the way she held herself. She looked familiar in a way he couldn't place, yet entirely new. It was the kind of presence that made the world feel slightly brighter and more alive, even in the early morning. As he passed the bench, she looked up at him. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and Daniel felt a flutter in his chest, a sensation he had not experienced in years. The moment was fleeting, and yet it left a lingering warmth that stayed with him as he continued his walk. He almost told himself it was nothing, just a passing glance, and tried to push the feeling aside. But then, to his surprise, she called out his name. "Excuse me, Daniel?" Her voice was gentle but clear. He stopped, heart racing slightly. How did she know his name? He had not spoken to anyone in years who knew him personally outside work or family. He turned slowly, unsure whether to approach or to walk away. "Yes," he said cautiously, keeping his voice steady. I need your help," she said, hesitating slightly as though unsure how much to reveal. "It's kind of unusual, and I know it might seem strange, but I thought maybe you could help me." Daniel's first instinct was to decline. Help? From him? After so many years of avoiding close connections, the idea of being drawn into someone else's life felt both exciting and frightening. He wanted to retreat, to keep walking and return to his quiet apartment, where life was predictable and safe. Yet there was something in her expression, a mixture of vulnerability and honesty that made him pause. "What kind of help?" he asked cautiously, trying to keep his curiosity under control. She shifted on the bench, glancing at the ground before meeting his eyes again. "It's personal. I need someone I can trust, someone who can guide me even if just for a little while. I've tried asking others, but I don't think they'd understand." Daniel felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. Her words were simple, but they carried a weight he recognized, a need for understanding, for trust, for human connection. He had spent a decade avoiding such moments, and yet here was one standing right in front of him. "I don't usually do this," Daniel admitted slowly. "I don't really help people with personal things." His voice sounded cautious even to him, betraying the nervousness he tried to hide. "I know," she said softly, almost as if she could read his hesitation. "I know it's a lot to ask, but I really don't have anyone else. And I thought maybe you would understand or at least listen." Daniel hesitated. Listening, he could do that. Offering advice, supporting someone, he hadn't done it in years, but the thought wasn't unbearable. There was a spark of something he had almost forgotten, the sense of purpose, the satisfaction of helping another human being. It was tempting, and against his better judgment, he found himself nodding. "All right," he said finally. "I can listen. Tell me what it's about." The woman's face brightened slightly, a mixture of relief and gratitude crossing her features. She introduced herself as Sophie. She was confident, yet there was a hint of nervousness in her smile. She explained that she was facing a situation she didn't fully understand herself, something that required guidance and a careful approach. Daniel listened, quietly at first, observing her as she spoke, then gradually offering small comments and suggestions, gently asking questions to understand better. As the conversation unfolded, Daniel realized that the situation wasn't trivial, but it wasn't dangerous either. It was a problem of trust and communication, of understanding emotions and navigating them carefully. And in that moment, he realized something remarkable. For the first time in 10 years, he felt the rush of connection. Not romantic or physical, at least not yet, but the kind of human connection that could be the first step toward healing and trust. Sophie's request was unusual, yes, but it was also sincere. She didn't demand anything from him. She only asked for guidance, for someone to listen, for someone to care. Daniel found himself drawn to her openness, her honesty, and her courage to approach a stranger for help. He couldn't explain why, but he felt that this encounter was meaningful, that it could mark a turning point in his life. Over the next hour, they walked together slowly through the park, talking in gentle, careful tones. Daniel listened more than he spoke, but when he did offer advice, it was thoughtful, measured, and compassionate. Sophie responded with gratitude, sometimes laughing softly, sometimes nodding as she considered his words. The morning sun climbed higher, casting warm light on the path ahead, and Daniel felt a sense of calm he hadn't experienced in years. As their conversation continued, Daniel realized how much he had missed these kinds of interactions. Not casual small talk, not polite work conversations, but genuine connection, where thoughts and feelings were shared openly and honestly. Sophie's presence was a challenge and a gift, a reminder that life could still surprise him, even after 10 years of solitude. At one point, Sophie paused near a fountain looking down at the water. "I know it's strange," she said softly, "but I really needed someone like you, someone who can understand even if just a little." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He wasn't used to this level of trust, this level of openness. But he realized he wanted to help, wanted to be part of her story, even in this small way. It was unfamiliar, even scary, but also exhilarating. "All right," he said quietly, "I'll help. Let's figure this out together." Sophie's face lit up with a smile that was both relieved and genuine. "Thank you," she said. "You don't know how much this means to me." Daniel felt a strange warmth spreading through his chest. It was not romance, not yet, but something deeper, something that had been dormant for years, the quiet joy of connection, of being needed and trusted. For a man who had spent a decade avoiding touch, emotion, and closeness, it was a powerful, almost dizzying feeling. As they continued walking, Daniel couldn't help but notice small details about Sophie. The way her eyes sparkled in the sunlight, the soft curve of her smile, the way she gestured with her hands when she spoke. He felt alive in a way he hadn't in years, and yet he reminded himself to stay cautious. This was trust, yes, but it was still fragile, and he had to protect his heart carefully. By the time they parted ways near the street where Daniel lived, he felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The encounter had been brief, but it had shaken something loose inside him. For the first time in 10 years, he felt the stirrings of human connection, and it was both terrifying and wonderful. "See you tomorrow?" Sophie asked, her smile gentle. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, tomorrow." As he watched her walk away, Daniel realized that his life, once so predictable and safe, had changed in a single morning. He didn't know what would come next, but he felt ready, tentatively, cautiously, to step into something new. Something that could awaken parts of him he had forgotten, parts he had kept hidden for too long. The next day, Daniel woke up feeling a mixture of anticipation and anxiety he hadn't experienced in years. He poured himself a cup of tea, as usual, but his hands trembled slightly. For 10 years, mornings had been predictable, safe, quiet. Now, even the familiar sunlight streaming through his window seemed to carry a new sense of possibility, almost daring him to step out of his carefully built life. He dressed and left his apartment earlier than usual. Every step he took on the way to the park was filled with questions. What if Sophie didn't show up? What if this was a mistake, and he was getting involved in something he couldn't handle? His mind raced, circling around fears he had not confronted in a long time. And yet, beneath the worry, there was an excitement he couldn't ignore, a curiosity that made his heart beat faster. When he reached the park, he saw her immediately. Sophie was sitting on the same bench as yesterday, reading a small notebook. She looked up as he approached and smiled warmly. Daniel felt a strange familiarity already forming. There was comfort in seeing her, yet also a sense of tension, as though this meeting carried weight he wasn't fully ready to understand. "Good morning," Sophie said, closing her notebook. "I was hoping you'd come." "Good morning," Daniel replied, slightly awkwardly. His voice sounded different even to him, carrying a nervousness he hadn't felt in years. I came as soon as I could." Sophie gestured for him to sit beside her. As he took the seat, he noticed the subtle energy she carried, the way she seemed aware of every detail around them, yet fully present in the moment. There was something magnetic about her presence, something that drew him in even as he tried to stay cautious. For the next hour, they walked together slowly through the park. Sophie began explaining more about her situation, revealing details she hadn't mentioned before. She spoke about challenges in her personal life, moments when she had felt misunderstood or alone, and her need for someone to guide her with patience and understanding. Daniel listened intently, sometimes offering small suggestions, sometimes simply acknowledging her feelings. As they walked, Daniel realized something he hadn't felt in a long time, the thrill of genuine conversation. He had forgotten how it felt to truly listen to someone, to process their thoughts and respond with empathy. It was a new kind of intimacy, one built not on physical touch but on emotional presence and trust. And even though he reminded himself to stay cautious, he found his defenses softening. Sophie noticed his hesitations. "You seem careful," she said gently. "I understand. You don't have to rush anything, I'm just glad you're here." Daniel smiled faintly, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I'm not used to this," he admitted. "I haven't connected with someone like this in a long time. It's strange but nice." She nodded, her expression understanding. "I get it. I think we both need to take things slowly." Daniel appreciated her patience. In the past, any hint of vulnerability had been met with disappointment or betrayal, and he had learned to shield himself quickly. But Sophie's calm demeanor and honest words made him feel safer than he had in years. For the first time, he realized that opening up didn't always lead to pain. It could lead to understanding and growth. As the morning progressed, they found themselves sitting under a large tree, the sunlight filtering through the leaves. Daniel noticed how Sophie's presence made the surroundings feel alive. He realized that the park, which had always seemed ordinary, now seemed brighter, more vivid, and more inviting. It was as if her energy carried warmth into the world around him. They talked about many things, not just her situation, but life in general. Sophie shared her dreams and ambitions, small joys and struggles. Daniel spoke cautiously about his past, about his years of solitude, about the fears that had kept him from connecting with anyone. Sophie listened with genuine interest, never judging, never interrupting. Daniel felt something stirring within him, a mix of nervousness, curiosity, and excitement. He noticed how comfortable it felt to share even small details about himself, and how satisfying it was to offer advice, guidance, and simply a listening ear. For the first time in a decade, he felt useful in a way that mattered deeply. There were moments when silence fell between them, and Daniel realized he didn't mind. He didn't feel the need to fill every moment with words. He could simply sit, watch, and exist beside someone without fear or expectation. It was a strange, calming sensation that reminded him that human connection didn't always have to be complicated or overwhelming. As the conversation deepened, Sophie asked questions that made Daniel reflect on himself in ways he hadn't in years. "Why did you choose to stay alone for so long?" she asked softly. Daniel hesitated, thinking carefully. "I guess I was afraid. Afraid of getting hurt, of trusting someone and losing them. After a long time, it became easier to avoid connections altogether. It felt safe." Sophie nodded thoughtfully. "I understand, but you also seem ready for something different now. I can see it in your eyes." Her words made Daniel pause. He hadn't realized how much he wanted to believe them. Perhaps he was ready. Perhaps he had been waiting for someone, even unknowingly, to show him that life could still offer connection and hope. Over the next few hours, they walked through different parts of the park, exploring corners Daniel had never noticed before. He noticed how Sophie observed the world, how she appreciated small details, how she approached challenges with curiosity rather than fear. Watching her, Daniel felt a shift in himself. He felt lighter, more open, as though the years of solitude had begun to loosen their grip. At one point, Sophie stopped near a small pond. "I know this is all very sudden," she said, "but I feel like we understand each other already. And I trust you. I hope you can trust me too." Daniel looked at her carefully. Trust. It was a word he hadn't spoken to anyone in a long time. The idea of trusting someone, opening himself to connection, both terrified and exhilarated him. Yet looking at her, he felt a strange certainty, as if something had shifted inside him. I think I can try," he said slowly. "It will take time, but yes, I want to try." Sophie smiled, a soft, genuine smile that warmed Daniel's chest. "That's all I ask, just try. We don't need to rush anything. We can take it one step at a time." Daniel nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and excitement. For the first time in years, he felt the possibility of connection, not just a fleeting moment, but the potential for something lasting, meaningful, and real. As they walked back toward the park entrance, Daniel realized that his world had already begun to change. He felt a sense of purpose, a spark of life, and the courage to face emotions he had avoided for so long. Sophie's presence had stirred something within him, a reminder that even after 10 years of isolation, it was possible to open one's heart again. By the time they parted that afternoon, Daniel felt exhausted but fulfilled. The encounter had been emotionally intense, challenging his long-held defenses and making him confront fears he had buried deep within himself. And yet he also felt a sense of hope, a feeling that maybe life could offer him joy, trust, and connection once again. As Daniel walked home, he replayed every moment in his mind, analyzing his reactions, his thoughts, and the strange warmth that lingered in his chest. He realized that Sophie's unexpected request had not only given her support, but had begun to heal parts of himself he hadn't even realized were broken. For the first time in 10 years, Daniel felt truly awake. He realized that isolation had kept him safe, yes, but it had also kept him from living fully. And now, with someone like Sophie entering his life, he understood that vulnerability, trust, and connection, though scary, were worth exploring. He returned to his apartment that evening with a sense of quiet anticipation. Life had shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, yet profoundly. The walls he had built around his heart were no longer unyielding. The spark of trust had been lit, and he felt ready, cautiously, but genuinely, to take the next steps in this new journey. Over the next few days, Daniel found himself thinking about Sophie constantly. Her presence, her smile, the way she spoke with quiet confidence, lingered in his mind long after their encounters. For a man who had spent 10 years carefully avoiding emotional intimacy, this attention was both exhilarating and frightening. He tried to distract himself with books, his walks, and his routines, but thoughts of her seeped into every quiet moment, uninvited but welcome. He realized that Sophie had awakened something he thought had been lost forever. It wasn't just curiosity or attraction. It was the feeling of being connected to someone else, someone who genuinely valued his thoughts, his presence, and his understanding. It was a type of closeness he had avoided for years, convinced that any attempt at connection would end in pain. Yet with Sophie, it felt different. It felt safe, real, and alive. The next morning, Daniel left his apartment earlier than usual. His footsteps carried a mix of anticipation and nervousness, as if each step toward the park was a test of his courage. He arrived to find Sophie already waiting, her notebook in hand and a soft smile on her face. The moment he saw her, Daniel felt the familiar flutter in his chest, a reminder of the long-forgotten spark of human connection. "Good morning," Sophie said warmly, closing her notebook as he approached. "Morning," Daniel replied, feeling the nervousness settle into a quiet warmth. He took a seat beside her on the bench, noticing again how her presence seemed to brighten the world around him. The morning light fell gently over her hair, and he found himself appreciating small details: the curve of her smile, the softness in her eyes, the ease with which she carried herself. Their conversation began casually, but gradually shifted to deeper topics. Sophie spoke about her feelings, her experiences, and her struggles with trust and understanding. Daniel listened intently, offering gentle guidance and thoughtful questions. He discovered that listening, truly listening, was a form of intimacy in itself. Each word they shared built a bridge between them, connecting two lives that had once been isolated in their own ways. As they walked slowly along the park paths, Daniel felt a growing sense of courage. For the first time in a decade, he allowed himself to speak openly about his past, about the heartbreak that had made him retreat from the world, about the years of solitude he had imposed on himself, and about the fears that had shaped his life. Sophie listened without judgment, her eyes reflecting understanding and empathy. "You've carried a lot alone," she said softly. "It must have been difficult." Daniel nodded, surprised at how comfortable it felt to share his truth. "It was. I thought avoiding connection would protect me, but I realize now that it only kept me from living fully." Sophie reached out briefly, a reassuring touch on his arm. It was small, tentative, yet it sent a ripple of warmth through him. Daniel realized that this simple gesture, the trust implied in it, was something he had missed far more than he had understood. For 10 years, he had built walls so high that even the smallest touch felt impossible. Now those walls were beginning to crack slowly, gently, under the weight of trust and genuine care. They stopped near a quiet pond, the water reflecting the morning light. Daniel watched as Sophie traced patterns on the water with a small stick, lost in thought. He felt a profound sense of calm, as if the world had slowed down just for them. In that moment, he realized that connection wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic events. It was about small, meaningful interactions, shared understanding, and mutual respect. "I feel like I've known you longer than I actually have," Sophie said softly, looking up at him. "Even though we just met, I feel comfortable around you." Daniel smiled, a quiet, almost shy smile. "I feel the same. I wasn't sure at first. But now I feel safe sharing things with you. It's strange, but it feels right." The honesty in their words created a new layer of intimacy, one that went beyond superficial conversation. Daniel felt a growing trust, a realization that vulnerability didn't have to lead to pain. It could lead to understanding, empathy, and connection. He began to see that Sophie's request, the reason she had sought him out, was not just about guidance. It was about forming a bond, building trust, and navigating life's challenges together. As they continued walking, Daniel noticed how much he enjoyed simply being near her. He didn't feel the need to entertain, impress, or protect himself. He could be present, listen, respond, and share in the moment without fear. It was a new experience, one that challenged years of isolation, yet brought a deep sense of fulfillment. They paused again near a quiet bench under a large tree. Sophie sat down, and Daniel followed, feeling the weight of the moment. Silence stretched between them, comfortable and reflective, filled with the unspoken understanding that their connection was growing stronger. "I didn't realize how much I missed this," Daniel said quietly. "Being with someone, talking, sharing, it's been so long." Sophie nodded, her gaze gentle. "It's okay. We all need connection, and it's never too late to find it." Her words lingered in his mind. Daniel realized that she was right. 10 years of solitude had taught him caution, patience, and self-reliance. But it had also shown him the emptiness of isolation. Now, with Sophie, he saw that he could embrace connection again, cautiously, carefully, but fully. As the morning faded into afternoon, they walked along the park paths, exploring small gardens and quiet corners Daniel had never noticed. He observed the way Sophie approached the world, with curiosity, openness, and kindness, and he felt himself changing in response. He was more alert, more engaged, more willing to notice beauty and warmth in small moments. By the time they left the park, Daniel felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. The emotional intensity of their interactions had challenged his defenses, forcing him to confront fears he had carefully hidden for years. Yet it had also given him hope, a fragile, precious hope that connection, trust, and intimacy were possible, even after a decade of avoidance. Walking home, Daniel reflected on the changes stirring within him. He felt a spark of courage he hadn't experienced in years, a willingness to take risks, to open his heart, and to embrace life's unpredictability. Sophie had not only asked for guidance, she had shown him that vulnerability and trust could coexist with safety, understanding, and mutual respect. That evening, Daniel sat in his apartment, replaying every word, every gesture, every shared smile. He realized that his world had shifted in subtle but profound ways. The walls he had built around his heart were no longer impermeable. Trust, once a foreign concept, was beginning to feel possible. Connection, once terrifying, was starting to feel natural. For the first time in 10 years, Daniel felt truly alive. He understood that the path ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and fears to confront. But he also knew that he had taken the first steps toward a life filled with emotional richness, meaningful connection, and trust. Over the next few weeks, Daniel found his life slowly changing in ways he hadn't anticipated. The mornings he used to spend in quiet solitude now carried a quiet excitement. Thoughts of Sophie lingered in his mind, but not in the nervous, hesitant way they had at first. Instead, they brought warmth, curiosity, and the sense that life could once again hold unexpected joys. He began to anticipate their walks, their conversations, and the small, meaningful moments they shared. Each day they spent together strengthened the bond between them. Sophie's presence had a gentle influence on him. He noticed small changes in himself. He smiled more, laughed more easily, and even looked forward to days that had once felt monotonous. The walls he had built around his heart for a decade were no longer barriers. They were openings, slowly letting in trust, connection, and hope. Daniel still felt moments of hesitation. Years of solitude had taught him caution, and he sometimes doubted whether he could truly embrace this new chapter of his life. But Sophie's patience, kindness, and understanding reminded him that he didn't need to rush. Connection wasn't about moving too quickly. It was about being present, attentive, and genuine. She had shown him that trust could be rebuilt, even after years of fear and avoidance. One afternoon, they sat in the park, near the small pond that had become a favorite spot for their conversations. The water reflected the sunlight, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers and freshly cut grass. Daniel noticed how serene everything felt in her presence, and he realized that this sense of calm was something he had been missing for years. Sophie looked at him thoughtfully. "You've changed since we first met," she said softly. "You seem more alive." Daniel smiled, a quiet smile filled with reflection and gratitude. "I think you've helped me see things differently," he admitted. "I was so focused on protecting myself that I forgot what it felt like to really connect with someone. You reminded me that life isn't just about avoiding pain, it's about feeling, sharing, and trusting again." Her eyes brightened with understanding. "I'm glad, and I think you're ready to embrace that now, slowly, carefully, but fully." Daniel nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. He realized that he had spent so long hiding that the idea of opening his heart fully was both terrifying and exhilarating. And yet, he felt ready. He trusted Sophie, not only in her words but in her presence, her consistency, and her genuine care. As the days went by, their bond deepened. They shared more about their pasts, their dreams, and their fears. Daniel spoke openly about his years of solitude, the heartbreak that had driven him into isolation, and the moments when he had almost given up on connection. Sophie listened without judgment, offering insight, encouragement, and empathy. Her support made him feel seen, valued, and understood in ways he hadn't experienced in years. One evening, as the sun set over the city, Daniel and Sophie sat on a quiet bench, watching the sky turn shades of pink and gold. The world seemed to slow around them, as if it had paused to witness this fragile, precious moment. Daniel felt a deep sense of gratitude. He realized that Sophie's presence in his life had not only helped her, but had transformed him in ways he hadn't anticipated. "I never imagined I'd feel like this again," Daniel admitted quietly. "After 10 years, I thought this part of my life was gone, but you've shown me that it's never too late to reconnect, to trust, and to feel again." Sophie reached out, gently placing her hand over his. It was a small gesture, but it carried trust, warmth, and reassurance. Daniel felt a surge of emotion, relief, joy, and a sense of belonging he hadn't known in a decade. He realized that he no longer feared vulnerability. Instead, he embraced it, understanding that opening his heart was the first step toward true connection and happiness. From that day on, Daniel's life continued to change. He became more engaged with the world around him, noticing small details, enjoying simple pleasures, and finding joy in daily routines. He reconnected with old friends, not out of obligation, but because he now understood the value of shared experiences and mutual care. His apartment, once a place of solitude, began to feel warm and welcoming, filled with small touches that reflected his renewed appreciation for life. Sophie remained a constant presence, a guiding force and a companion. Their conversations grew deeper, more meaningful, and more personal. Daniel found himself not only listening and guiding, but also leaning on her when needed. The balance of giving and receiving, of supporting and trusting, created a relationship built on mutual respect, care, and understanding. One day, as they walked together through a quiet part of the park, Sophie looked at Daniel with a thoughtful expression. "You've grown so much in these weeks," she said. "I can see how much more open and confident you've become." Daniel smiled, feeling a sense of pride and wonder. "I owe a lot of that to you," he admitted. "You've helped me rediscover parts of myself I thought were lost forever." Sophie shook her head gently. "I didn't do anything special. You did the work. You allowed yourself to open up, to trust, and to embrace life again. I just walked alongside you." Daniel felt a deep sense of humility and gratitude. He realized that Sophie had not only guided him, but had also inspired him to take responsibility for his own growth. He understood that life was about choices, courage, and the willingness to embrace vulnerability. As the weeks turned into months, Daniel's relationship with Sophie continued to flourish. He felt comfortable expressing emotions he had long suppressed, sharing his thoughts openly, and trusting someone fully. The fear that had dominated his life for 10 years gradually faded, replaced by a sense of possibility, hope, and genuine joy. One evening, as they sat on a bench watching the city lights twinkle, Daniel reflected on how far he had come. 10 years of solitude had taught him caution, patience, and self-reliance. But meeting Sophie had reminded him that life was meant to be shared, that trust and connection were not weaknesses but strengths, and that it was never too late to rediscover the joys of companionship. "I never thought I'd feel like this again," Daniel said softly, looking at her with gratitude. "I thought I was too late, that the years had taken away my chance at connection, but you showed me that it's never too late to feel, to trust, and to love again." Sophie smiled, her eyes reflecting warmth and understanding. "It's not about time. It's about the willingness to open your heart. You did that, Daniel. You chose to embrace connection, and that's what matters." Daniel felt a profound sense of peace. For the first time in a decade, he felt whole, alive, and capable of experiencing the depth of human connection he had long avoided. He realized that life, with all its uncertainties, challenges, and joys, was meant to be lived fully, openly, and with trust in others. As they walked home together that evening, Daniel understood that Sophie's unexpected request had changed his life forever. It had led him to rediscover trust, emotional closeness, and the courage to embrace vulnerability. He felt ready to face the future with hope, confidence, and a renewed sense of purpose.